When you look at a world map, there's a narrow piece of land where two of the largest oceans on Earth almost touch each other. The Atlantic Ocean on one side, the Pacific Ocean on the other. That thin strip of land is called the Isthmus of Panama. At first glance, it doesn't look very impressive. Just a narrow stretch of jungle between two massive bodies of water. But for centuries, that small piece of land was one of the biggest obstacles in global trade. Ships traveling between the Atlantic and the Pacific had only two choices. The first option was brutal. Sail all the way south, around the dangerous waters of Cape Horn at the bottom of South America. That journey added thousands of kilometers to the voyage. Storms were violent. Shipwrecks were common. Many sailors never returned. The second option wasn't muchísimo. Ships could unload their cargo on one side of Panama, transport the goods across the land by carts or rail, and then load everything onto another ship on the opposite coast. Slow, expensive, dangerous. For centuries, this narrow strip of land acted like a wall between two oceans. Until humanity decided to do something that sounded almost impossible. Instead of going around the land, they would cut through it. The idea of a canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had existed for hundreds of years. But the dream wasn't romantic. It was practical. Shorter routes meant faster shipping. Faster shipping meant cheaper goods. And cheaper goods meant power. Whoever controlled the shortcut between the oceans would control global trade routes. The concept was simple. Dig a navigable waterway across the Isthmus of Panama so ships could move directly between oceans. Instead of sailing weeks around South America, ships could cross in just a few hours. But turning that idea into reality was another story. The first serious attempt came from France in the late 1800s. The French had just completed one of the most famous engineering projects in history, the Suez Canal in Egypt. The man behind that success, Ferdinand de Lesseps, believed Panama could be done the same way, a canal at sea level, just like Suez. But Panama was nothing like Egypt, and Beri Suan, the jungle would prove it. In Egypt, the Suez Canal passed through flat desert. Panama was the opposite. Instead of sand, there was dense jungle. Instead of dry land, there was heavy tropical rain. Rivers could swell in hours. Mudslides were constant. The terrain was mountainous. But the biggest enemy wasn't the environment. It was something far more dangerous. Disease. Workers began dying from yellow fever and malaria. At the time, scientists didn't even fully understand how these diseases spread. Mosquitoes carried them silently through the camps. Thousands of workers fell sick. Thousands died. Despite the terrible conditions, excavation continued. The French tried to dig a canal at sea level, cutting through hills and rock. But the terrain constantly collapsed. Every time workers removed earth, the jungle and rain pushed it back. Costs skyrocketed. Construction slowed, and eventually, the project collapsed completely. The dream of a canal seemed impossible. Just when the project seemed doomed, a new power stepped in. The United States. For the U.S., the canal wasn't just about trade. It was about military power. A canal would allow the U.S. Navy to move fleets quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific. Without it, warships would need weeks to travel around South America. So, in the early 1900s, the United States took control of the project. Around the same time, Panama separated from Colombia and became an independent nation. Shortly after, the U.S. obtained the rights to build and operate the canal. But money and political control weren't enough. Two massive problems still remained: nature and the seas. Solving those would determine whether the canal could ever exist. The first breakthrough was engineering. American engineers realized the French idea was wrong. A sea-level canal in Panama would take decades and possibly fail again. So they proposed something revolutionary: a canal with locks. Instead of cutting the land down to sea level, ships would be lifted up. Massive lock chambers would raise ships to a higher elevation where an artificial lake would carry them across the Atlantic. Then ships would be lowered again on the other side, a giant water elevator for ships. The second breakthrough was medicine. American doctors began a massive campaign against mosquitoes. Swamps were drained. Standing water was eliminated. Homes were screened with nets. Entire areas were disinfected. For the first time, yellow fever and malaria were brought under control. Workers stopped dying in massive numbers, and suddenly, construction could finally continue. Now came the hardest part. Cutting through the mountains of Panama. The most difficult section became known as the Culebra Cut, a massive trench carved directly through a ridge of hills. Workers used explosives, giant mechanical shovels, and thousands of laborers. But the real heroes of the project were the trains. Rail systems constantly moved through the construction site. They carried away millions of tons of rock and soil, day and night, non-stop. Yet the mountain fought back. Heavy rains turned the ground into mud. Slopes collapsed repeatedly. Entire sections of earth would slide back into the trench. Workers would dig it out again, only for the land to collapse once more. It became a relentless battle between engineering and nature. But digging the canal wasn't enough. Panama had another unpredictable force: water. The Chagres River was especially dangerous. During the rainy season, it could flood violently. Instead of fighting the river, engineers decided to use it. They built a massive dam. Behind it, they created Gatun Lake, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world at the time. The lake became part of the canal itself. Ships would travel across this giant lake before entering the locks again. The lock system worked, using gravity. Water flowed naturally from the lake into the chambers. When a ship entered a lock, the gates closed. Water filled the chamber, lifting the ship upward. Step by step, ships were raised 26 meters above sea level. Then the process reversed on the other side, as simply there, but executed on an enormous scale. In 1914, the Panama Canal finally opened, and the world changed overnight. Routes between the east and west coasts of the Americas became dramatically shorter. Trade between Asia and Europe gained a faster path. Shipping companies redesigned their entire logistics networks. Ports expanded. Supply chains evolved. The canal became one of the most important economic arteries on Earth. But the story didn't stop there. Over time, ships became larger. Much larger. The original canal could only handle ships of a certain size called Eventually, global trade demanded bigger vessels. So in 2016, the canal was expanded with new larger locks. These allowed a new generation of ships known as Neopanamax to pass through. Even today, the canal remains a delicate system. Every ship that passes through consumes enormous amounts of fresh water. Without rain to refill Gatun Lake, traffic through the canal must slow down. And because this narrow passage controls global shipping routes, it also holds enormous geopolitical importance. For decades, the United States controlled the canal, but in 1999, control officially passed to Panama. Today it is managed by the Panama Canal Authority, and it remains the backbone of the country's economy. What once was a barrier between oceans became one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements, a place where nature was reshaped at an enormous human cost. Thousands of workers lost their lives building it, but the result changed the movement of the entire planet.